Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has long since entered a state not of sight and sound, but of mind.
Tim Longo.
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
Good. Yeah, it's.
I of course use that because we've been in a state of mind playing through this game
And time.
Yeah. It's a
little Twilight Zone-y. That's good.
Yep. Yeah, I thought so. Well, last night you were, texting me because you were frustrated.
Oh my gosh!
Because you were stuck.
If we weren't a family-friendly podcast, I'd be cussing it up right now.
Oh, I know. And well, actually, we've been. You only have to say something explicit once, and you have to mark it. But and we do.
We still try.
Much always.
We try.
We do try. We try. Try to be family friendly.
Oh, but
I think our audience is.
If the gloves are off, I will if you want me to. No, I'm kidding.
Feel free.
No need.
If people just saw your texts, I actually tweeted that I can tell that you're really enjoying playing Day of the Tentacle when I get texts that are just a string of curse words.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it overall. It's just, we'll talk about it today. Just those moments that you get stuck in. And I kind of realized and the other thing I texted you is just kind of a reminder of probably why I stopped playing them back. And we think we talked about this last episode some, and we talked about fantasy fulfillment and puzzle games to some degree, or adventure games to some degree. I feel like whether conscious or subconscious, the designers want people to feel smart, right? Like at the sense of this being a detective and solving problems and the gratification of that. And there's some fantasy fulfillment in that of feeling smart and kind of, feeling clever and, oh, I got it. I figured it out. Oh, I'm so smart. But then the opposite of that is when you are not figuring it out and you're like, what am I not seeing? And then once you do, it's so obvious, you feel dumb and you're like, I guess I'm not smart. And Brett will be the first one to remind me that he is smarter than I am, and I'm just.
Well, I was going to say it reminds me a lot of debugging.
That's a really good example.
When you're programming, right? I mean, it's like the number of times where I have gone and when the program is going good, you feel super competent, and then you have a bug, and you're like.
Yeah,
and you can't see it, and it ends up being the stupidest thing, and you just can't even You're like, I guess I just don't know how to program. Yeah. I've been doing it my whole life, basically, and I still really don't know how to do it. I'm just not that smart.
I remember, when I haven't scripted in a long time, but I used to do a lot of scripting back in the day, and I remember that same frustration. But then the same gratification once you...
Yeah, the same... You're elated, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like, oh, man, it works.
Yeah.
And the same thing's here, Oh, man, that idea worked, Yeah. Oh, and I guess we should say up here at the front before we get too much deeper in, we are, as we promised last time, we're going to spoil things this time. We are not going to worry about trying to protect people's playthroughs. If you don't want to know, then you can either listen to the cast by holding your hands over your ears and going la 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 la, or you could just come back to it after you finish the game. I probably recommend the latter. You'd look a little silly there on the train with your earbuds in. So we'll just go ahead and spoil puzzles and story stuff, and everything is free to tackle at this point.
Yeah,
but I did want to disclaim that here at the beginning.
Absolutely.
Because when you talk about adventure games, it's really hard to talk about it, without being specific, and last time, actually, I was wondering if, last time you said there was a puzzle that you got stuck on because you overthought it because of something I said.
Oh, no, I'm going to forget what it was.
It probably had to do with the carriage or car you had to wash.
No,
was that it?
No,
because it rains.
It'll come to me.
It rains when you do
that
stuff?
One you actually helped on.
Okay.
It'll come to me. I'm looking at the chart right now. But we found a great chart via a friend at work, Tom Matthews, sent. I was talking about the podcast with, and what's this website? The website is down DevBlog. And he has a great analysis of Day of the Tentacle. And one of the things that he did is he built a huge flowchart of the whole game and all the puzzles. So I'm kind of referencing that. So I'll think of it. Let's come back to that. Darn it. That was going to be a good story, too. It'll come to me.
Okay. Yeah, it's a really interesting site, and it's one of the things that we kind of talked about looking at it was through that we found Ron Gilbert's Rules of Game Design, which are kind of gleaned from an article he wrote way back in 1989 about why adventure games suck, which was really decrying, I would say, like some Sierra type stuff, probably. I mean, games that had lousy conditions of loss where you just, I didn't pick up this thing or do this thing early in the game, and now it's not solvable, but I don't know that, right?
Yeah,
it's like, it's like playing, making a jigsaw puzzle or something like that, and you've lost 3 pieces, and you've been added 2 pieces that actually form a different puzzle. Like, it's so frustrating to get down to the end and be like, oh, and I can't finish this thing, and it's, fundamentally this is an entertainment thing that we're doing. When we play games, we're entertaining ourselves in some way, we're enjoying what we're doing, and it feels so like, it's not like we're not already to a degree wasting our time, but when you can't finish this thing because of some early decision you didn't know you were making, it feels like now I've really wasted my time. Like, because you can't even have the satisfaction of completing it.
Yeah,
and that is bad. That is bad game design.
Yeah, you especially if you have a feeling that you might know what you need to do roughly, what your next step is, but you've broken something, or it turns out that you've broken something, and you literally can make no progress. Right. So to your point about time wasting, like if you're to the point where you actually literally can't move forward, and you're just going in circles, which not the same as Sierra example you're using, but I had that experience with Day of the Tentacle last night. So
yeah, I mean it's something that happened to me with the first time I played System Shock 2, as I revealed on that podcast, is that I got to the end of that game the first time I played it, and my character build was so broken, or what resources I had available to me were so few that I literally couldn't finish it. I just couldn't even. It wasn't even a skill thing. It was like if I moved into this room, I was instantly dead. I was so low on health. I just got so starved for resources that I couldn't continue, and it was very, very frustrating. I put it down for a year or whatever it was, and then came back to finish it on God mode. So, anyway.
So
a little digressive there. Tell us about this puzzle you got stuck on.
So, last night?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's jumping a little bit to the end, but I think we're going to probably end up kind of jumping all around in the conversation. It was the 2 beds in Hoagie's time up in the attic, dealing with the cat and the mouse, the fake mouse. And you said you had gotten stuck on it as well, and it was related to the 2 beds. So this cat is playing with the toy mouse, and you realize that you can sit on the bed that's near the cat, and it'll squeak, and it distracts the cat. Right. The mattress is squeaky, and so that's something's here. Got to deal with this, and then you realize this is Ned and Ted. I forget which ones they are, but it's their bedroom. So anyway, it's the 2 of them. So you go to the other guy's bed up top, and his just makes a thud sound when you sit on it. So clearly I need to switch these 2. And when you sit on the squeaky bed, the cat stops playing with the mouse, and I want the mouse because of a cat in Laverne's time, I assume, at that point, and so I really want that mouse. So the cat walks over when you squeak on the bed near him, and he or she goes over to the bed and then quickly goes back to the mouse. You don't have time to get the mouse. So clearly you need to kind of swap those. So my frustration lies in I didn't try. I thought about all sorts of ways to get these beds either swapped or to move one of the beds or to I mean, I was going as far because of other puzzles in, oh my God, Bernard's Time, where you're dealing with pulling things in and out of the window, the mummy. Up in that same attic, I was like, okay, maybe.
And you were thinking I'll be using the pulley again.
There's a
or
pulley
something.
out there, right? And it's like, okay, the pulley. I'm going to use a pulley in all three of the time frames, and that was not true. And then I have another point about that with the mummy in Hoagie's Time as well, which also pisses me off. Which I believe they broke one of their own rules there, personally. But anyway. So I tried, I was like, I need to tie something to the bed and pull it out the window. And I was like, I came up with all these ridiculous scenarios. And then later than I'd like, I realized there are two ways to interact with the squeaky bed. You can actually interact with the bed itself, and then you can interact with the mattress separately. Which part of my frustration is I don't think they do that very often. Right. I couldn't think last night. I was trying to think of, is there another one of those?
Right, where they decompose an object into object and part of object.
Right. In such a kind of subtle and slight way. And I couldn't think of one. There might be one. Somebody can kind of refresh our memory on that. And so it never...
The closest is maybe the flagpole, where you have the crank and the crank handle and the flag.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, that's a pretty good example.
I mean, they do feel like distinct objects, though.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
and the crank is in...
And you've clearly, you've been motivated to make that flag.
Yeah.
So you put, so to you, it's already a separate object. Whereas normally most people don't think of a bed, I don't think of my bed and think, oh, yeah, it's a mattress and box spring and frame, right? I just think bed, right?
Yeah.
Pillows maybe, sheets maybe, but not the mattress and things like that. For sure.
What's even more confusing is that it's the proverbial pixel hunt, because the difference in the pixel, location of the two, the mattress and the bed, are so intertwined and close to each other that I'm pretty sure the first couple of times I came into that room, I didn't even find the squeaky. I didn't find the distinction physically, with the cursor.
Oh, interesting. No, I think I did, but I'll tell you, I think that's a controller difference.
Yeah,
because a mouse you can whip across the screen so quickly, whereas the controller just doesn't move as fast. I mean, they haven't implemented it to move quickly.
Right.
So I think I actually just. It wasn't even a thing for me to hunt for that. Although I did miss another object in the game for the same reason. The video cassette over the stereo.
Oh, interesting.
That was the object I was referring to, last cast or the cast before, where I said it looked like the same object to me.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't notice that it was distinct. It was basically the same color, same color palette, which makes total sense given the restrictions of the time. But I could not pick out... just visually, I did not see that there was a separate object there, and I didn't have any reason to move up from the stereo. Whereas I was moving back and forth to the cat and stuff and trying to figure out what to do there. So interesting.
Yeah, and then you had mentioned last episode about the spatial part of this puzzle, but also and you should jump in and kind of explain further what you meant on the production side of it, because there is an element here too that I think maybe, I don't think it was conscious, but maybe subconsciously I was thinking, if this is what they want me to do, they would that's ridiculous. They would never do this the way that the puzzle's actually solved, because it would be so elaborate and complicated to actually implement or something like that. You want to talk about that point?
Yeah. So what I was thinking, actually what stopped me was just the idea that I was going to see an animation of Hoagie moving the mattresses. I literally was like, so what you have to do, and what I referred to on the cast was that, it's a use of space. It's using the fact that the cat has to move from point A to point B, and if point A is or point B is further away, then it takes longer, and you'll be able to get the mouse. That I figured out pretty quickly, but I kept trying to find something else in the world that was squeaky that I could put on the other bed.
Oh, go ahead.
So I was trying to find like something analogous to the mouse that I could basically do an Indiana Jones style swap of like, oh, now you're going to have this object instead of that object, right? So I'm there with my idol and my pile of sand, and but I couldn't find a thing in the world that did that, and so I was so frustrated. And I had noticed the distinction between the bed and the mattress. But I thought that was just so that I would. Oh, I don't know what I thought. But at a certain point, I was like, oh well, they wouldn't do something where you swap the mattresses because they don't, they're not going to have the additional budget to have more animations here to do something crazy like that. That's really hard and perspective changing. I'm like, that's just, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And of course, once you solve the puzzle, they just cut away to Ned and Jed beneath it, and they just show, text on the screen, and you hear audio of like grunt, push, shove, grunt, which is a total cartoon thing to do. Like, if you're having a fight between two characters, you don't actually animate them fighting. You put this big cloud of smoke, so you can't see the absurdity of them fighting.
Yeah. So my my ridiculous. Yeah. To your point about like trying to find something to swap the mouse out with, my ridiculous concoction in my head, which I cannot believe is how the narrative that I made up. So I was convinced that I needed to, for whatever dumb reason, get that bowling ball out of Green Tentacle's room and and have it bounce on the bed to make a squeaking sound.
Oh, interesting.
Over and over again, just enough time so it would bounce a few more times so I could stand next to the mouse. And so you know what I mean? And I was convinced that was it. So I actually fixated on the bowling ball for a long time, trying to figure out who.
I didn't for that reason, but I spent a lot of time in that room going, "What is the deal with this bowling ball?"
Yeah,
and I actually think that's not a great because that only turns up at the end of the game. It sort of feels like a weird thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to have that in plain sight all the time. I mean, that would be sort of like, you're watching Citizen Kane, and at the beginning he says Rosebud, and right there he's holding the sled, right? It's just like the whole thing. It's like, oh, it's right here in plain sight the whole time. Yeah. I guess it's not quite like that.
Or I mean, even having the sled be in the background of many scenes throughout the movie. Do you know what I mean? Or something where you're where you could have put two and two together kind of pretty easily when it needed to be more of a surprise or something. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how many times they show the sled or what happens there, if they even do, but it's been a long time. But yeah. And then the other part of that I don't know, I'm going to meander here a little bit, but when Purple Tentacle started talking about the shrinking ray, I thought that the ray was going to come into play at some point down the road because Bernard was too weak to pick up the bowling ball. So I thought we were going to have to shrink the bowling ball at some point or something weird like that.
Interesting, yeah.
So and they kept hinting those meanwhile sort of cutscenes that would play. Where
meanwhilest.
Yeah, that were playing. I wasn't sure what their goal was there in some cases, because there was the one where they were building the shrink ray, and then there was also the one in Hoagie's time when they were talking about the Constitution, and more of the Constitution authors coming to visit. And so to get off on a separate thread, that had somehow gotten into my head that I actually needed to pose as one of those other authors and come and somehow deal with the Constitution to get the pen that way, if that makes any sense. And so I'd actually thought, because the rules that they'd set up with the other two mummies in the other time, I thought I needed to get that hat off of the mummy in the lobby there. And so I tried everything to get that hat, fixated on it for way too long. But it turns out that particular mummy has no purpose, and the other two were critical. So that, I feel like that was a bit of a break in some.
Well, that is an adventure game thing that you think of normally, like the rule of three, I don't know if I don't think we've already talked about that. If you talk to like Sean Clark or Mike Stemley or any of the adventure game folks, and you see it in the Monkey Island games for sure, you always have to do three things with an object, that with a more elaborate puzzle. So in the Monkey Island games, there's like three judges you have to appease, to do some kind of dive or something like that. You always have these kind of things where you have to do three things, and it actually shows up here with the Laverne mummy, where you've got to make it have a good laugh, a good smile, and a good hairdo.
Yeah, that's my favorite puzzle.
Yeah, in some ways it was my favorite too, but it's mostly because I got it all so easily. Like I didn't get stuck at all on it, so it felt like when programming's going good. But the mummy itself appears and is used in two timelines and not in a third, and that does feel really strange because you associate doing three things with the mummy for sure. It is really strange that it that almost feels like a puzzle that was maybe cut for time or for obscurity or whatever. I'd be kind of curious to find out. It does, there's no interactable stuff on it except for the mummy itself, but I could totally buy that maybe you needed the hat at some point for something. It's so distinctive, right? Well,
the other rule they set up with the mummy that I forgot to mention last time that I actually thought was a pretty good design is that you can talk to the mummy, to all three of the mummies, and they actually are sort of like mini hint or reminder dialogue trees on what you're doing. So if you talk to, maybe Laverne when I forget if that happened, but for Bernard and Hoagie's, if you talk to them in the middle of your main macro objectives, Hoagie will actually ask that mummy, how do you think I should get gold? How do you think I should get oil? How do you think I should get vinegar? And then those dialogue parts of the dialogue tree go away as you find those objects. And one of the dialogue trees for talking to that mummy was about the hat specifically, and it's actually very elaborate. It
is very elaborate.
There's a lot that they talk about, or at least Hoagie talks about in one direction about the hat. So I was like, well, clearly because of everything else you talked to this mummy about, the hat's got to be important. Right. And so anyway, it's this typical thing that happens in adventure games. You put it all in your head together in your head, and you think you've got it all figured out, and then it turns out not to be the case. And so that is usually where I get myself into trouble, and I feel dumb.
Well, no, you're not dumb. You're just differently creative.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You always find the best ways to describe my dumbness.
Yeah.
I'm trying to rack my head on that one. Yeah, but anyway, continue.
If you, I do feel like that whole rule of three is a big deal. We kind of glossed over the rules of game design. I kind of want to get into another one, which we both thought was kind of important, which was, as this website calls out, that you need to give the player options.
Yeah, that's a good topic. Yeah.
I feel like one of the great things about Day of the Tentacles puzzle design is that at any given point, you have a lot of different puzzles to solve. Some of them are interrelated, but for the most part, you can, if you're stuck in one timeline, you can go to another one and do a bunch of stuff that's independent. And it's really fun when they cross over. I particularly like when you do stuff in the distant past and it affects Laverne's life. I love that. I think that's great. Mm-hmm. So the flag puzzle is terrific that way. But my absolute favorite moment was if only they'd pass a law that that every basement had to have a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
I was like, that's what all these meanwhiles have been about, to talk about, well, do you think we should have a law about this? Do you think we should have a law about that? It's so good. That was one of the puzzle objects I didn't find, though, that flyer that does, like George says, every home should have a vacuum cleaner in its basement. So that was an object I didn't find. That and that video cassette were the two.
So that, yeah.
But I feel like this is how the player has options in Day of the Tentacle, is that even though at some point you may get down to I only have one puzzle left and I'm stuck, like you basically did last night. You still, almost all of the game, have lots and lots of options, lots of things to go look at, right? I mean, that's always kind of there, but you always feel like you can move the ball down the field a little bit, just by kind of, okay, I'm stuck on this one, I'll go do another one. The thing that kind of happens where it kind of works against itself is sometimes I feel like, and we've mentioned this before, that I kind of lose track of some of the objects of how they've been used already. So that right-handed mallet was in my inventory for so long, and I kept wondering if it was going to come up, because I think I did that one out of order. It had something to do with the old woman looking at the video monitors.
Yeah,
Edna.
Yeah, you can't push her out of the door unless you change the statue in the future.
Oh, see, I did that puzzle first.
Oh, wow. Yes.
So I had no idea what it did, really. I didn't understand that's... and that made that particular puzzle, that was the frustrating puzzle I was talking about and alluding to, where there's a simple thing you can do to her, which is just to push her.
Oh, yeah, right.
On the wheels, right? But because I did that one out of order...
Uh-huh.
I didn't know about that. I didn't know that's why I couldn't do that to her. I had no idea why that statue was important. And you can't go back and forth.
Right.
So that's actually a case where it might have made sense to be able to keep switching between them, just so you could go and see it. This is what the statue was like before. Because I saw it once, but I, didn't remember it, certainly. And I did that puzzle very early, I've got a left-handed mallet, he's using a right-handed mallet, and he's putting it down is an obvious thing to do. So I just did it, and I didn't know why I was doing it.
yeah. So that's funny. That happened to me. Okay, so on the really quick on the statue one of the objects that your video cassette problem that you had where you just didn't see it. For me, that was the mallet.
Oh, interesting.
And so I actually had figured out early on that I could push her, because if you push her before you change the statue, you clearly see you need to change the statue, because as you push her out of the door, she grabs on to the sword part of the statue and prevents, and kind of does the cartoon kind of, stretches her arm out and then slingshots back into the room, and you can't push her all the way out the door because she holds on to the statue. And so you need to switch hands of the sword in the statue in the future, so she can't
so it won't be there for her to grab onto.
So I knew what I needed to do, and I knew I needed to switch out the mallet, but it's another darn narrative that I've made up in my head. And when you're in the doctor's basement in Hoagie's time, the mallet's sitting right there on the shelf, but it blended in with everything. I didn't see it. So I didn't have what I needed. I had no idea that it was even there until accidentally finding it way, way later. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And so in my head, somehow the wood that Thomas Jefferson had on the table that kind of looked like a mallet head.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, okay, there's the mallet head I need. I need to make a mallet out of that.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
I think.
Oh, and when he chops down the tree, then I'll be able to get some wood from the tree.
Oh, yeah. I just made up this whole other thing, just like the bowling ball. And
I feel like that feels intentional.
So that goes back to we talked about last time, kind of the intentional red herrings, like the bowling, like the mouse hole. In the room, and there's a mouse in the game. It's a fake mouse, but I thought maybe, those two were related. But it turns out the mouse hole had nothing to do with the mouse. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I actually thought those were related as well. That was that seemed obvious. But I was like, of course you're going to do something with that mouse in that mouse hole. You're going to need to get a cat to paw at that mouse hole or something. Right. I didn't know what it was going to be.
But of course, one of the rules of this game is that is never the case, right? Like it's always a wackier combination of things. And the other, I just thought of another red herring that I wanted to mention, but I'll come back to me. Okay. But yeah,
you just thought of it and forgot.
I just thought of it literally and forgot. I'm just all over the place because I want to talk about so many things. But your point about the Ron Gilbert's rules is an interesting one because I feel like I can't think of another adventure game example off the top of my head. I'll have to give it a little bit more thought. Maybe The Longest Journey or something like that, where it's way, way more story driven and thus more linear in many places. Where that design tended to be, and I'm probably bastardizing the example because I don't remember, I haven't played it in so long, but those examples tend to be, if you get stuck on one puzzle, you're basically not moving forward.
Right.
Because there are no...
I had that same experience.
With The Longest Journey?
Yeah, with Longest Journey specifically. And I ended up putting it down as a result.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that what ends up happening is that you get extra frustrated because you literally know there's nothing else you can do. And at least with this game, that, it's kind of just dawning on me as we're talking about this and looking at Ron's rules. You do have those options, like you said, and then my head's going to, but also the story here is not that. There is, it's very light. Right. This isn't a big story. And so I don't know.
It's lots of little narratives, there's these two brothers who both want to be artists, and their father disapproves. Like there's lots of little connections and stories and stuff like that, but not one big narrative, not one. The overarching narrative is we need to get these people back to one place in time, so that we can stop the tentacle from taking over the world.
It's way more playgroundy, which we talked about in the first episode, which I love and had forgotten that it's kind of like it's like an open world adventure game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And people wonder about how to do that stuff. And I guess this is how.
Yeah.
You look at this structure and, because occasionally you'll hear people talk about maybe trying to do a procedural adventure game and and how that would work. It's a difficult problem, right? But an interesting one. Uh-huh. And to a degree, Humongous did some of that with especially Pajama Sam, I believe, where there are you could restart the game and you just get a new random seed and some of the puzzles would be different. And it actually worked. I don't, I'd be hard pressed to provide examples. But there actually were different solutions to some of the puzzles. I can remember, my sons would be playing the game and I'd be out like mowing the lawn and they could shout at me out through a window and they'd say, how do we get past this part? Because they just wanted to keep seeing more of the cutscenes more than anything else. I mean, they're quite young. They were like 5 and 3.
Yeah.
And I'd say, oh, you have to do this with that thing. And they'd be like, that? You can't do that. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And then I'd go in. That's how I discovered that game is actually moderately randomized. Yeah. It's not heavy. There's not, as it's, there's only so many puzzles, but it is actually different, many times. Like, I don't know how many combinations there are of the game, but it's more than a couple, because they played that game through several times and they kind of got better at just figuring those things out.
Yeah.
Because the solutions have a similar feel. And of course it's targeted at a young age. So it's meant to be pretty simple. But it was a great example of really doing something very different. Highly recommended for parents with small children. I think you can still get those games.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe that was a goal of replayability potentially, because kids tend to, if they find something they like, and those games probably weren't that long. Maybe they wanted to give them a little bit of something if they played it again. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know, but I feel like Dave Grossman may have worked on that one as well, on Pajama Sam. I spoke to him quite some number of years ago, and I seem to remember that coming up, but I may be misremembering that. It has been quite a long time since that conversation. And I'm not even sure. I guess it was the first one that we played. No Need to Hide When It's Dark Outside. Maybe he did some writing for it or something like that. But anyway, I only mention that because it's kind of interesting that, he may have helped on that game, and it was another one that kind of pushed this,
Yeah.
ability to do lots of different stuff in the game that is not kind of in traditional in adventure games.
They were experimenting in a kind of an unlikely place with adventure games, which is cool. Yeah, I wanted to bring up another example as I'm looking at the chart. To your point about like solving something early, not knowing what it was going to do, I had put the hamster somehow in the ice machine really early, somehow accidentally, and not really. And then the other problem, which I completely feel dumb for not doing earlier, is the kumquat tree and the paint. Like I didn't have Laverne unlocked for very early, so I had this whole wing that I knew I needed to unlock, to get access to other stuff. I had this whole wing that wasn't available to me, so for too long, and so I had obviously put the hamster in there, but I didn't know what it was going to be doing. I didn't know how it related later. I thought, don't I need that hamster for the machine downstairs? And all these, because you can actually, I think you mentioned you can actually use the hamster in the machine downstairs, but it doesn't do anything.
Right. It runs on it, and it spins the thing, and then I think actually you have to do it. You didn't do that?
No, I didn't do that.
Huh. I thought you had to make it sweaty so that when it went into the ice machine, it would freeze. But maybe I'm just making that up. They may have taken that step out.
So it's was it a sweaty hamster when you put it in there?
It was, yes.
Oh, I don't think I did that. I might be wrong, but maybe I did. I don't remember. When you take the hamster out of the microwave later, he's all wet, which you probably saw, right? Because then you need to put the and another good feint for them was the sweater. Because I was convinced that Hancock needed that sweater.
Right, so was I.
Yeah, but as a nice subtle hint, they kept saying it was not the right size for anything you tried it with, which in retrospect I don't think helps you that much if you don't know what you're going to do with it. But in retrospect, it is kind of funny because it wasn't the right size for anybody until you shrunk it for the little guy. Some of the best icon art, by the way, are the hamster, the different states of the hamster.
Terrific. Yeah.
I want T-shirts with like all three versions of him. Or something.
I feel like we should do a T-shirt like per game. I would do one that would be like Chocobo Dream World for sure.
That's great.
With a big feather on it or something like that. And for this one, the hamsters would be pretty good. It would be pretty good.
That's a clever idea. When the podcast takes off and we have all this extra dough, we could do that.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break. Welcome back from the break. We're here talking in our sort of spoiler special, diving into the puzzles of Day of the Tentacle and talking about how they connect up with some of the goals and strengths of adventure games. Probably no reason not to stay away from a couple of weaknesses too. But in the break, we were specifically talking about how Day of the Tentacle and other LucasArts games really feel like a warm bath compared to other adventure games. We sort of touched on it in the first part, but here you always know you can go forward. In fact, at LucasArts and QA, they even had a term for it, which was an A bug, which could mean a crash. It's something that was really, really important to fix. But it also meant any time that you couldn't progress. So it was any sort of stop progress bug was an A bug, and a B bug was sort of other functionality stuff, and C bugs were sort of features and nice to haves. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. I started in QA, so that was definitely. I still call those A bugs today, even if it's a modern game. But luckily, I think a lot of modern game design tries to avoid that situation anyway. If it's logic based.
Right, sure. I mean, I think that was the frustration. That sort of frustration would turn people off from gaming, right? And that's the last thing AAA wants or needs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, when the business got big enough, you want to make sure that it's as usable as possible. Yeah.
But this is kind of ahead of its time, and those kind of LucasArts rules are ahead of their time for that reason. That you would have, a cannot progress bug be that important is a huge deal. But you see it. Certainly we saw it in Skyrim or whatever. I mean, that was annoying. Yeah. We didn't classify them that way, by the way. I mean, we had kind of categories like this is a crash bug, or this is a logic bug, or whatever, scripting bugs and things like that, and then producers just kind of determined what was the most important and scheduled them. Now we have an army of producers, so that also has changed.
Well, we deal with because Halo is such a simulation based game as well. Like those can become a conversation right at that point where you have to like you said, talk about scheduling them and talk about whether you even sometimes should fix them, because Halo also has always, been proud of the fact that you can do some wacky stuff with the simulation. And,
right.
And sometimes we have the conversation where, hey, we're going to leave this one in because players are going to use it for speed runs, or they're going to find some wacky way to get, a mantis on top of a banshee, and we're okay with that.
Right.
Even though it could potentially break something. And then you can fly your mantis, which is a mech, but for anyone who doesn't know, this walking mech, you can get it on top of a banshee and fly it around. And two players can be, a player can be in both. And that can cause problems, but you know what? Let people do it if they want to.
Right. I mean, it's like, sometimes those things are found after the fact, like in Tribes, the rocket sledding thing you could do jumping down a hill, which I never mastered by any means, but we had some really good guys from Dynamics who worked with us on I guess Starfighter, probably Starfighter.
And then they incorporated that into the future versions of the game because it became a mechanic. That's a good example, because that became kind of an infamous example in the industry of a way that players would exploit something, and then it became part of the actual identity of the game. But for this, it's probably different. Well, definitely different for people who didn't grow up with adventure games and play everything from text adventures up through Sierra games and LucasArts games, because somewhere deep in my psyche, there's this sensibility that you can fail on something, or you can hit a dead end, or you can die, or that you can create an A-bug for yourself. But when I just remember distinctly when LucasArts made that design decision, and maybe we'll get to ask somebody kind of exactly where that came from. Maybe it was Ron, but it just was this comforting thing to go and play in a LucasArts adventure game, because you knew that it was a closed circuit. You knew that you weren't going to die. You knew that the game was built and designed in such a way where you can experiment and dabble and not feel like you're going to mess something up and really, prevent a situation where you're going to have to start over, or, load I forgot to save. So it's now how much time did I lose? It's like, you're never going to lose time other than the time I lost by walking in circles, not figuring out my puzzles.
Yeah, it's a good and interesting design choice, and it very much is a design choice at that time. You had text adventure games that were literally not like, you were sort of expected to just sit in the game for a long, long time and figure everything out. Like to maybe draw stuff out on graph paper and figure out how all the things connected, so that you could do, like, the earliest text adventure games had scores, like you got this many points on your playthrough of Advent or whatever.
That's right.
Or, in the case of what's it called, Witness and Deadline, the Infocom games, there were mysteries that were real time. Well, not real time. I shouldn't say that. They were time advanced with every step that you did. So if you...
There's a fuse.
Yeah, exactly. Great. That's a great analogy. It's if you accidentally, went into the wrong room and now you had to get back out, you might miss something important. And in theory, you didn't actually need to see everything. Like, you could kind of build it up over multiple plays, but you were kind of expected to play through these things over multiple, months or whatever, until the next one came out. And that made a lot of sense in an environment where there weren't tons of games. I don't think players would really stand for that anymore. People do that today out of love. People really connect with the game. They love it, and they go and they write game facts and all that stuff. And they figure everything out about it that is possible to figure out, to the point of writing books. But that's different than we made a conscious design choice to make it so that you had to do like that level of work to get through the game, in an environment that's sparse,
Yeah.
So it's interesting how much the growth has really affected the industry in all sorts of ways, and impacted design.
Yeah, and sometimes for better, for worse. And we've talked about this, I think, in other episodes or other series for the podcast, but the indie movement, I think, has been cool in one regard because I think some of those things that we now feel like we have to do to protect the user from some of this stuff we're talking about, I think indie games have felt more freedom to not necessarily abide by those more, business savvy designs,
right,
what I mean? Where they, I don't have to protect the player as much. So I'm going to break this rule because I want to, and
right.
I think it's good that the game space has gotten wide enough and broad enough to allow that to happen. And it keeps us honest in our realm because of the AAA stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's also great just because it does reinforce the question of what things are choices, that this is a choice that we're making. And even though it feels like we're not, just because it's the default, we are still making a choice, right? I mean, The choice might be not to challenge the status quo or, whatever. And it might be an unconscious choice. It's really, really refreshing to play. I've been playing Doom on the break, the new one that's just come out, and it's refreshing to play a shooter again that just lets you carry 9 weapons, or whatever it is, just this absurd amount of stuff. It's just kind of great to not worry about. And I loved the games that you have to make a choice. There's really interesting tactical stuff there, but it's also just fun to be a walking arsenal and not think about it, So it's interesting to revisit some choices, I'm not sure I would revisit the choice necessarily to make an adventure game something you can't move forward. I mean, it's something that you could break. But, maybe there's something interesting there.
Well, there could be, just to give an example, I don't have one off the top of my head, but, there could be a reason based on the characters that you're playing or the context of the world. Day of the Tentacle is a lighthearted, zany world, as we talked about with, there's not much of the story. Yes, the world's ending, but it's all kind of lightly presented. And, I don't know if you're doing something darker and deeper and, or like I'm a big Cthulhu fan, as we've talked about before, and some of those adventure games, it's like, example. You actually do want something to be at stake because of the context of the world of the characters, and so to not have somebody be able to die would be weird, so.
Well, and then the other alternative that springs to mind is Planescape Torment, where, you have to, you're gonna fail, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So it kind of threads a needle there of sometimes you're gonna lose. You're gonna wipe the party or however that works. It's been such a long time, but basically the character's gonna die. But because he is an undying character, he's gonna come back somewhere, and you're gonna be able to continue. And there are some puzzles in that game which rely on that fact, as I recall. One notable thing where you're going into a wizard's lair. I won't go too much into that because, we may play that one of these days.
We should really heavily consider that one. As much as I recall it being super long, it's such a good game, man.
It is a lot shorter than. I feel it's probably shorter than Final Fantasy IX.
That's my recollection. Well, that's going to be our scale, pretty much, probably for the rest of time.
That one was definitely pushing it, but I feel like Torment is shorter. It's not like Baldur's Gate or something that was 100 hours or something like that.
You could be right. A slight tangent, but sort of related. I was kind of skimming through some of the article that we mentioned from this one fellow that kind of analyzed things, and he actually noted that Ron quotes Noah Falstein with a concept that Noah would call "make it bushy," and I guess that point that Ron had diffed off of, which was advice that Noah had given him while they both were at LucasArts, was about the balancing of linear and nonlinear branching in the way that the structure of the game was built, and meaning that once you laid it all out, it would look like a bush because it was more wide and kind of full versus just one tree or one branch in a linear fashion. So the make it bush.
That's a great way to describe that.
Yeah, it's good. And I wanted to call Noah out there too, and I think he's at Google now. But
Dave Grossman did actually write the dialogue for Pajama Sam, so I looked that up on the break as well.
Cool.
So that was another kind of influence there in that kind of broadness or whatever. It sort of feels something is there in terms of innovating the genre, maybe. But yeah, I mean, because, I feel like this one is the most unique amongst LucasArts games for being this broad in terms of player actions like you could be doing at any given time. I can't remember another one that feels even close. Usually there's 2 or 3 things in a Monkey Island game that you're kind of pursuing, but not like literally dozens. It feels like there's easily a dozen puzzles in each timeline that you're trying to figure out. That may be a little bit hyperbole, but it doesn't. I don't know. It feels like a lot. It felt like I had a lot of things I was trying to move forward.
And and we talk about a lot how hard it is to keep track of that stuff because there really is they don't give you any mechanisms to keep track of things, and there's not good feedback on what like you said with the hammer or what have you, what you've used things for. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But yeah, I'm just trying to rack my brain about the previous games, and none of them had that bushiness. Like none of them were as bushy as this one, I feel like, and maybe that's why this one's so beloved. That because it was a bit of a standout in that regard. Because I think even the Monkey games I don't remember if they had literally chapters, but I feel like there were chunks that you clearly were moving on. I guess in some cases it was especially in Curse, you were moving from island to island, as I recall.
Right.
So you kind of knew you weren't going to go back to the previous island.
Right. And that's, certainly true of Grimm as well. Grimm is probably a little bushier, but not a lot. I mean, a lot of what I love about Grimm has to do with the narrative, and there's just this noir feel and all that stuff. And it's less about individual puzzles. And, when I was playing it again on its re-release last year or the year before, whenever it was, I played for a while with my girlfriend, and she was just not, I don't know, I don't think she loved the cutscenes and things like that, and like the puzzling, she could care less, right? So it is a really, it takes a certain type of person to be into these.
It can get in the way, right? And it's like, a couple puzzles that we talked about the break too. I finally remembered the one, the red herring that you inadvertently had produced in my head on the first episode, where you had mentioned something about. Sorry, I'm switching gears, by the way.
No, that's fine.
You had mentioned something about putting something in the outhouses that something that you didn't want to put in the outhouses because you wanted to get it into the future in a different way because you needed the state of it to change or not change.
Right.
And so I had just, before we had recorded, I had was dealing with the spaghetti. And when you put the spaghetti in the chronotrons, whatever they're called, it softens it because of the water.
Yeah.
And so I thought what you meant when you said that was that you need to find a way to get the spaghetti into the future without softening it. Because you didn't, for whatever reason, but again, this is the stupid narrative I put in my head. It was like, oh, he's clearly talking about the spaghetti because when you put it into the water, it gets soft, and I don't want it to be soft. So I was like, how do I get it to be hard again so I can send it? And so I thought, okay, clearly I need to put it in the time capsule. I don't even know where I was going with all this stuff because it's not even in the Hoagie's time. But I thought I needed to get it somehow in the past so I could get into it. It's ridiculous. I just went in this whole thread. And then I finally realized is that you were talking about the vinegar.
Yeah, I was.
And
the wine. You have to send the wine forward in time. In such a way, method. Yeah, exactly.
Which was brilliant. Yeah. It's a great concept, but for whatever reason, I just and then that also had thrown me off right for the human contest because the spaghetti was a critical part of that, and I didn't think it was supposed to be soft, so I was like, I didn't need it for that, or blah blah blah. But so that I listened to intently, and that hung me up. And then the other one that I was going to mention was that we talked about in the break really quickly was another one where I got stuck was my imposing rules that are not there, or not taking things as face value as I should, in that the letter you get in the past, I believe, from Hoagie, that is sent to the scientist, one of the doctors, basically telling him, I think it's to him actually, I guess they never really say who it was to. The letter says, "Oh, you're brilliant. Your designs are brilliant. Please come to Baltimore immediately." And I had associated that letter to other scientists in the different times, all the different Zeds and
the Dr. Edisons.
The doctors, the Dr. Edisons. And so I had in my head imposed a rule upon that object that I could only give it to those guys. But what you needed to do, and this ended up being a big sticking point for me because it locked down a big part of the puzzle threads that I actually really needed to progress. You need to give it to the gag designer who's depressed in Bernard's time, who has his door chained, and you need to cheer him up by giving him the letter proving that he's actually smart and that he should be excited and he should go to Baltimore. Right. But I just locked that down, and I had the letter the whole game. It's in my inventory, and I kept trying to give it to all the doctors at different times and all this blah, blah, blah. And so I needed to give it to that guy, and then that kind of, all goes from there. But it's just funny how you make up those little rules that don't exist.
Right.
And usually it's kind of right, in the front of your face.
Yeah, it's kind of a follow-on from the what we were talking about last time, like what you do when you get stuck. I think the easiest way to not get stuck is to remain open to the possibility that your thinking is wrong.
Yeah.
To just so that you're open to the clues that it's going to give for you. And I think that you and I are pretty different about that. Which is funny. I would expect it to be the other way around, given our personalities. It's really amusing to me that you're the one who is like, stuck in the mud about the way things are.
Yeah.
And I'm the one who's all zen about, I just got to do this other thing. Personality-wise, we're totally different. But when we play, we switch our mental states. It's really funny.
It is funny. It's so funny that you mentioned that, because we are I try to be so zen about stuff. I wonder if it's because I'm totally riffing here on a tangent, but I wonder if it's because the way we're playing these, because we're playing them on a schedule, but also we're playing them at the same time. And I wonder if I feel this. There are a few people in the world that make me more competitive than you. And and I feel like I'm always because I know you're playing too, and I want to beat you. I want to finish first. You know what I mean? And so I get stuck. I don't know.
That's why you saddled me with Hitman 2. I see.
Yeah. See, there was this subconscious I'll get him.
And I still got more silent assassins than you did.
You did, and you embraced it, and I got stuck in my own way. It's so hilarious. There's this meta game going on as we do this podcast.
Yeah, and you asked me on the break about how long it took me to get through the game, and I was around 8 hours, and you were a few more than that.
I was 11. At least that's what Steam says. But it is, for me, it was a lot of wandering around. By the way, give you kudos on the tactic of putting all of the objects, giving all the objects to one character. That definitely helped me through things, because what I'd do is when I'd get stuck, I'd actually go from character to character. Like I'd give all of them to Hoagie, and then I'd have Hoagie wander around his areas, and then I'd give all of them to Laverne, and then have her wander around. So it actually was pretty useful.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Well, and if I hadn't known, like, kudos to those who have written in and said you can just drag them to the portraits, because
oh, geez,
that would have made that impractical. Like, oh, I've got to go switch, and you'd have to be switching back and forth between times just to pull them out of the chronogens and stuff like that. That would have been a madness, and I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't had that bit of feedback. That's good. The vinegar was the one I was talking about, and the other one that was really weird for me was the hamster. Putting that in that ice machine.
Yeah.
Like, just getting to that point, I was like, because I saw the ice machine the whole time, and I was like, oh, okay. I finally, that makes sense, in the weird world of this game, that I've got to get this thing forward in time, I guess. I don't know why I thought I had to get it forward in time. I don't really remember what prompted that. I guess I got to the point where Laverne needed it to charge the battery, or to get the generator going so she could use the outlet. And that's when I was like, oh, I've got to get this hamster driven generator going. How am I going to do that? And you can't put it in the chronogen, so it's got to get to the future somehow.
Yeah.
Those sorts of puzzles I liked a lot. You really liked the beauty contest, you said, in the first half.
Yeah, I just I liked all the different elements you had to bring together because there was so many inputs to it,
right?
Because you needed all the different, like you said, the rule of 3 on the mummy, and you had to get the mummy there, and you had to use the roller skates, and it was, and the theme of it was funny because of the whole human show thing, and
yeah. I did like that a lot. I liked the other one with the mummy as well quite a bit, partly because I loved that the IRS showed up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And their dialogue is pretty funny. If you just go up and talk to them, they're pretty amusing to listen to. Yeah. But also because they literally wrapped him up in red tape, I thought that was just a great sight gag that they don't say anything about it. They don't oversell it. It's just like he's just wrapped up in red tape, and if you don't notice that, you don't get it. No biggie.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. It was funny. I had actually painted the mummy in advance of that, just like, hey, what can I do with this red paint? Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. I mean, you mentioned the hamster thing. Like I said, I had put him in there early on, but not really. I didn't know why, and I had put in Laverne's time, I had gotten the extension cord and all of that into the window. I had done the vacuum cleaner. I'd done everything I needed to do down there, but I couldn't get into there because of the mouse problem with the beds we started talking about.
Oh, right.
Because I couldn't get
because you needed to get the tentacle guard
away
to chase.
Yep. And so I had everything was primed up. Like it was, tight as a drum, and I just needed to unleash it, but just that one thing. Yeah,
pretty good.
Yeah, pretty impressive. It definitely, like I said, I've downloaded a few adventure games, put on my iPad recently because we're playing this, and so it's been nice to kind of return to the headspace of adventure games and kind of, not be so, against them as I have been over the past, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
It's kind of opened my eyes back up. I fear, though, that this one, as frustrating as it can be for me, or it has been for me, I fear that, not all of them are going to live up to it. So,
yeah, I think this might be a high point. I mean, I'd like to play The Last Express again, which is available on iPad. I actually had it for a while and just have not had a good chunk of time to devote to it. I tend to like smaller stuff on the iPad. I should have bought it for the PC or something. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that we normally do when we kind of end a series is to talk about what we take away. I think this time we've definitely talked about that bushiness, and some of these rules of game design. I think that's kind of been threaded throughout. But I also feel like a lot of those things have already been taken away, from adventure games because they were so foundational to the industry. It was really arcade games and adventure games, early on. And, anybody who got into game development, by the late 80s or early 90s had probably played either one or the other or both, had been really an arcade game player or had been really an adventure game player if they were a PC person. Probably text adventure, but and so I think that has just been threaded through, just the history of video games, and the reason why we have narratives in games at all is to a degree because of the adventure game heritage, and certainly any puzzle elements and things like that crop up even in your sort of what we call action adventures, or that sort of thing. So yeah, the hybridization. I mean, the same thing happens happened over time with RPG mechanics, right? Like the proverbial, Modern Warfare has a bunch of RPG mechanics in it, as far as like leveling up and stuff. And like the genre blending is really, it's a neat trend that has happened over the past 30 years or what have you. Yeah, and we should, I definitely, if we do another RPG, I want to talk about that in depth because there are things that I think are very different about that that I think are worth discussing. But that will be for another time. The other point that I wanted to hit again for our kind of closer is just that it's a takeaway for me that this is an interesting kind of distillation of this problem. But for me, being more mindful of rule sets when we design and making sure that they are, they're never going to be perfect. And we're always going to make mistakes because we're only human and no designer is perfect. But to always strive for the holy grail of having that closed circuit, closed network of things really tightly clarified and consistent, and using things like the bed thing that we mentioned, where I feel at least that there was some rules bending there that actually was not my fault per se as a player. And then the other example I was going to give that I think was not necessarily rule breaking, but I think a big bend that we didn't mention was the getting Dr. Edison to sign the contract was a dialogue tree puzzle. And there aren't a lot of those in the game. Right. And in fact, when you finish that,
I actually got stuck on that one as well.
You get an achievement for it. Then the achievement literally says dialogue tree puzzles are hard, or something like that. And it's like, and I had kind of accidentally happened through it because I just tend to do all the dialogue options just for fun. But it was, I feel like, again, it was kind of a little bit unfair. And so just that concept of, especially if you're making a bushy game, for me, at least as a designer, thinking about making sure that stuff is pretty tight.
I think the only problem is that different people are going to get stuck on different stuff or for different reasons, right? I got stuck on the bed puzzle entirely because in my brain I was going to have to see it. Like that made no sense at all for me to get stuck on that. With the dialogue puzzle that you mentioned, I got stuck on it entirely because I'm less likely, like and this is partly from the adventure game past, is like if I see a bunch of dialogue entries and they're all kind of funny, I will tend to, I'll read them and then I won't listen to all the responses because, again, there's some time pressure stuff with that, of just us playing this on a time, on a budget of time. But, for me, it was also just like, oh, okay, I get the sense of that. But this guy's not going to be any help. I got to go figure something else out. Yeah. It was sort of that. I was thinking that the wad of gum would be
use like silly putty. I think I referenced that in an earlier episode, that's what I was thinking of. Like I would find his signature somewhere else, and transfer it with the gum.
Wow. Yeah. That's,
like you used to do with like newspapers. Yeah. This is something most kids won't have done these days. But when I was a kid, you'd get silly putty for $1 or whatever. Your parents would put it in your Easter basket, and then you would smooth it out till it was super flat, and then you roll it onto a piece of newsprint, usually the comics, and you'd peel it back away, and now you'd have a reverse image transferred to the putty, and you could put it on a piece of paper. I mean, it would degrade quite a lot, but you could just literally copy it that way. That's something you could.
That's some clever thinking.
It was a simpler time. We had to amuse ourselves however we could.
I mean, on the puzzle, that was clever thinking.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well,
Well, those are the narratives you put in your head.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And you just gotta let them go, and they don't work. All right. Well, that's us talking about Day of the Tentacle. We did get one email from somebody talking about a time that they get stuck in a game, which is something we asked for. This is a different game, but I thought I'd read it. It is from E. Shields, and E writes, Eric. Hey guys, I wanted to tell you about when I got stuck in a game. I had been gifted an original Game Boy for Christmas, packed with Zelda Link's Awakening. That's one that's close to Tim's heart, I know. I made it to, I believe, the second dungeon, and there was a room with 3 enemies, and the map existed, a key existed. I couldn't get the key. I tried every ridiculous thing my 9-year-old brain could imagine. After a few maddening weeks, I put it down for, 6 years or so. Found it in the bottom of a drawer and started a new game. When I made it back to that puzzle, the feeling of failure immediately returned. I used all my cunning and guile and persevered. Rabbit, bat, Skeletor. Never again will I forget the answer to the riddle. And then he follows up with a question. With all this adventure puzzle game talk, have either of you played The Witness? I considered it, but life intervened. You guys got me thinking about it again. Any thoughts on the game? So I don't know if you've played that one, Tim.
No, I haven't played it yet.
I have. I have not completed it. And I think it's been patched since, but the original release, I find certain first-person games give me motion sickness. It's particularly bad in Source Engine games. I don't know if I've mentioned that here before, but like the Stanley Parable made me very, very sick after about 40 minutes, and I had to lie down. I got that motion sick.
Wow.
I almost never have this problem on a console for whatever reason, but with The Witness, it was there again. I was playing on the PS4, and so I was only able to play it in 30-minute, 45-minute bouts before I'd start to get queasy, and I just had to set it down. And that's not a game, you're kind of keeping this puzzle logic in your brain as you play it with these boards. So it made it difficult for me to go very far in it. That said, what I did play, I really did genuinely love, and I think it has since been patched with something, probably a wider field of view to help with that problem for those who have it. My thoughts are, the puzzles are really interestingly designed. The environment is really, really beautiful. I am to some degree not sure the two necessarily go together well, that they need to be that. This is sort of it's like if you had this, beautifully rendered, well-realized environment and you go around doing crossword puzzles. It's just kind of I don't see how these two things fit together. I mean, it's nice to have this beautiful environment, and there are a couple puzzles that have the environment involved. I mean, I'm not saying it makes no sense, but it's kind of a stretch for me. And for Blow, that's about telling this story and his philosophical whatevers. To me, I'd kind of like to do the puzzles, and I don't know. So I'm kind of mixed on that aspect of it, but. I mean, the puzzle design is really, really good, and it's the sort of game that I expect to come back to, and probably spend entirely too much time trying to figure out those last handful of puzzles that are really, really hard. Because some of them already were getting pretty difficult when I was playing, But it is great when you kind of figure stuff out and you're like, oh, I get that now. Or, the best puzzles, I guess, do interact with the environment a little bit, but a lot of them just don't. So it's kind of like, well, okay, here's another puzzle. Sort of like playing a Professor Layton game or something, where it's like, oh, hello, Mr. Baker, and he's like, oh, aren't you that famous puzzle solver? I had a puzzle this morning. And you're like, what? That doesn't, this is not how the world works.
Yeah.
But, solid game. Definitely very, very enjoyable. Sort of like mixes Myst with like a really solid grid-based puzzle thing that you might get in a magazine. So,
yeah,
cool stuff.
That disconnect is actually, I think, one of the reasons why I haven't been too drawn to it yet. I probably will play it eventually, but it just, in my head and kind of when people talk about it, and I've heard about it on other podcasts being described pretty in depth. It just seems weird enough to me where I tend to like, the game mechanics and systems and the world to be as cohesive as I can get them for whatever reason. And so, yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we're wrapping up Day of the Tentacle. We've been working on a guest. There are all kinds of intervening factors that are making it difficult. Tim is himself heading off for a little vacation. It is summer, and so other people are taking vacations. But there will be a break of a week.
The week of the 4th. Yeah,
we'll have no episode that week, and then hopefully we will come back both with an announcement of our next game, which we need to do a little research on. We have a candidate, but we need to make sure it's actually playable on modern systems. It's from about the same time as Day of the Tentacle, so it should be, but we'll see how that goes. That's all I'm going to tease about that. And hopefully we'll be coming back with an interview. We do actually know a lot of these guys, so it's really just more of a scheduling problem than anything else.
Yeah, we have a lot of good options, so we'll have somebody on at some point. So
yeah. All right, we'll look for that. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Brett at Brett_Duville, and he is
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR.
You can find the podcast at Dev Game Club and at devgameclub.com, and you can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. And have a wonderful vacation, Tim, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. I will.
All right. Okay, signing off then. Goodbye.
See ya.